And now, the survival show that once survived post-New Age woo and zombie herpes. In this episode, we sit down with Sam Coffman of The Human Path. We're going to discuss going beyond first aid, way beyond first aid, his school, The Human Path, and herbal medicine without the white robes, woo, and incense. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 165. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole. Safe and sound. Sam, welcome to In the Rabbit Hole, man.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and before we dive in, I want to first thank you for your service. You are former Army, as I understand it.
That's correct. Yeah, 10 years total.
Wow.
Two different terms of service, but 10 years. Yeah.
Now, two different terms. What were the two different terms?
Well, I came in at first in '82. I was what's known as an interrogator. At the time, it was a 96 Charlie, but then they actually changed that MOS to a 97 Echo while I was in, and worked as. Really, I lucked out and worked as a what you would call maybe an interpreter, liaison / what they say human intelligence collection on what used to be the East-West German border. So I lived in Germany, and I spoke. I studied German first at DLI, and then I spoke fluent German, like native fluent German, within about a year of living there, and just worked over there as kind of a civilian clothes, civilian car type job, and then got out, went to school, and then came back in, and I was in Special Forces. Then I came back into the real Army, I guess you could say. It was it's Special Forces, and I was a medic. I went through the 18 Delta, with SFAS and then the Q course, and then was a Special Forces medic. And so that was 6 years.
So you were a Green Beret, and out of total curiosity, because I was a child of the 70s and 80s, and of course that Green Berets were the big thing in the 70s and 80s, and now these days it's Navy SEALs. But what's the actual mission of the Green Berets? I was always a little confused by that.
Well, yeah, and that changes, of course, like any special operations, it changes based on what the previous sort of theater, war theater was, So okay. In my day, it was really Vietnam, it was the post-Vietnam era where it was really, the whole idea was to be able to, the idea was a team of 12 men could go into an area and train an insurgent group battalion sized, So that was kind of the Vietnam model with the Montagnards and that approach, which was a very valid approach, of course, and now it changes, of course, with the war that we've had over in the Middle East and things. We see a lot more direct action or foreign internal defense, FID, what they call FID missions, and then also the concept still of going into training either insurgents or just people that are maybe in a more remote area and teaching them how to become a viable military force. So that's kind of the military side, but there's a big side on the inside as a medic, especially, that's much more related to, working with people, working with indigenous people of an area that you might be working with, and it can be anything from family medicine to pediatrics to veterinary medicine, and then of course taking care of your team, and that can be everything from trauma, obviously, to just basic, day to day, what we would consider to be honestly almost family health type stuff.
Mm-hmm. So now, how did you get into all of this? Because that's to back up even further, because I know like most people's stories kind of start with their childhood as far as where they end up with their passions later in life. What's your story with that?
Yeah, I think I grew up in a very outdoor literate family. My dad was a geologist, and we spent summers in places like Montana and Idaho. I was born in Spokane, Washington, actually, and so we would spend these, extended periods of time as a family, kind of like the Swiss Family Robinson, in very remote areas that by horseback or by jeep, and then he would be out all day, gathering rock samples and stuff like that. And so, we were I had two older brothers who were much older than I, and they were real kind of engineering types, so we were working with ropes and pulleys and setting up a camp and just having one tent that we'd all live out of, and chopping the wood and building fires. Those were types of things that were really, and even at home, growing food and canning all of our winter food. And we had about an acre, and we grew a lot of food on it, and had kind of a little bit of an orchard for fruit trees and stuff. So all of that was very much, I think, intrinsic to just growing up. It's true, and my dad and mom both came from very kind of wheat farming and ranching type of environment too. So that definitely played a role. But then I don't know. I always felt the military for me, at the age of getting out of high school was just a way to get away from home. I didn't want to go. I had no desire to go into debt even then, which that wasn't much back then. But I knew that there was no money to pay for it, and I wasn't really into going to what I consider to be 13th grade, really, which was what college was at that time.
Uh-huh.
So I had no appreciation for it. I really didn't, even when I came back and on the GI Bill went back, I still didn't have an appreciation for college that much. But so the military is always fascinated me in terms of the fact it's one place where you get paid to excel. You get paid to stay in shape. You get paid to be good at what you do. And I like that kind of professional environment. I always have. I've always had kind of a hate relationship with the military. There's a lot of stuff about it, especially during peacetime. I know there's just it's a lot of BS, and you see that growing even now. You see a lot of things that have changed that are, I won't get into that, but there's a lot of things that I think have been that are problems in the military, and there probably always have been. But the good side is this idea of having a mission, completing a mission, especially as a team. It's just that camaraderie and the working together with other people that you can really trust is something you don't find in other walks of life very easily.
Mm-hmm. So now, I guess, is it that wrapped up in a big nutshell? Is that how you came to found the Human Path, the school that you have?
Sort of. So in the process of that, by the way, I really got into herbal medicine. So I got into plant medicine. I was always like, again, I grew up in a plant literate family.
Yeah.
So even as a 5-year-old kid, walking around with my mom, gardening, which we all as kids grew up doing a lot of gardening, and hearing her talk to plants was just normal. This whole relationship with the plant world was a very normal thing for me. So the idea of looking to plants for medicine was definitely not out of anything weird or anything strange for me. I got into that prior to coming back into Special Forces. So I had studied herbal medicine for a couple of years, and I actually even had to make a decision between traditional Chinese medicine. I was seriously considering going to a TCM school that was where I'd been going to college, or going into Special Forces medic school. To me, it came down to, if you really want to study medicine, where do you need to go? And I have a long-standing love with martial arts, and I'd been studying martial arts since I was 13. And I got at a certain point where even the instructor at the time told me, you're really not going to get anywhere else without studying some sort of medicine, some sort of way in which to heal the body as well. And so I kind of had I had a lot of stuff that I was thinking of, or that I kind of really was attracted to sort of the mystical, Oriental, kind of idea of martial arts as a kid. And so that kind of played into it with the whole healing side of things, and that played into it maybe with plant medicine too. But then once I started working with plant medicine, and especially once I went through Special Forces Medic School, and I actually injured myself really badly in the Q course, and I would not have made it through without plant medicine, I realized how effective plant medicine really is. It was really an eye-opening. And of course, that was kind of my baptism of fire. And as I always say to people, you don't start to appreciate herbalism and herbal medicine until you've actually experienced the healing for yourself. And so once that happened to me, and of course it had to be a trauma, right? Because that's what I'm really into. It happened to be that. And that was a very profound experience for me. So it was really pretty much, never looking back at that point. I just kind of hit the ground running.
So now that's interesting. And so are there actually formal schools around herbal medicine? Because I think, and I'm not trying to be cute here, but I don't think when the layperson thinks of it, they don't think of urban medical school. Herbal medical school. They think of traditional medical school, and herbal medicine tends to have this very woo-woo sense about it, flowing robes and chanting and incense, but not a lot of actual healing. And I know that's not the case, but walk us through that. How
well, it kind of is the case in some many
well,
cases.
yeah.
So herbal medicine has unfortunately gone through a huge kind of a dark age, and it's been really stymied and put under cover by or just kind of kept undercover and under wraps by the existing model of medicine we live in America, which is the allopathic, we call allopathy or orthodox medicine.
Okay.
It goes back to the 1910, really. Around then there was a report done, research that was paid for I believe, the Rockefeller and Carnegie's that was basically, it's called the Flexner Report. And it at the time went around and basically was a big survey of all the different medical schools, everything. Anybody could have a medical school. If you were a chiropractor in a little town, you could teach people chiropractic. If you were a DO, an osteopathic doctor, you could do that. If you were an herbalist, you could do that, whatever. And so, and medicine looked a lot different back then. In fact, allopathy, what we consider to be medicine today, was a derogatory term. That was where you went to die. You went to the allopath because they were using mercury and arsenic and bloodletting, and that was the precursor of what we now consider to be modern medicine. And I'm not saying it's like that now, but back then that was sort of the environment. And so what happened was there ended up being laws passed. There was basically laws pushed through that forced the closure of most of those schools. So there's about 2,500 schools, I think, at the time, shut it down to about 250 by implementing a rule that said, okay, all medical education now has to be tied into a major university system or a university system. So what that meant was it took medicine away from people of color. It took it away from women. It took away from, anybody. I mean, if you wanted to be a village healer and there was somebody teaching that in your village, in your community, you could do that. And so now it became white male upper class, medicine is what had happened, through that kind of change in medical school to university systems. So there were no female doctors. There were no, doctors of color, of course, not at the beginning. So that was kind of where we started. And then at that point, pharmacy, so basically the roots of big pharma started to write the curriculum. And having been to med school myself, at least for less than a year, but I went long enough, as I mentioned to you offline, I had to choose between family or medicine, basically, or medical school at that time because of financial reasons. But having gone through that and seen how much of medicine now is taught in a kind of reverse engineering process from a pharmacological action back to a quote unquote cure for a disease process. And there's an entire system for that goes all the way to ICD-10 codes and insurance billing that is included in this huge infrastructure of defining how we look at medicine that is not necessarily accurate. In fact, in many ways, it is entirely inaccurate. In some ways, it is accurate. If I get hit by a bus, believe me, I want to go to an American OR with a good, orthopod who knows what they're doing, of course. But in many, many cases, it's actually, in my opinion, very harmful to our. And we could go through statistics that I think would very much back up what I'm saying. And I'm probably preaching to the choir anyway, even with your audience.
Yeah.
But my point to all of that is that, herbal medicine, so 1910, we started to see this dark cloud and really allopathic medicine won. And even osteopathic medicine, which is now no different in terms of school than allopathic now, they even got kind of kicked to the curb and they had to kind of come crawling back on their knees. And they ended up, it took a couple of decades until osteopaths and DO schools were considered to be, quote unquote, medical schools. Meanwhile, herbalism just pretty much got completely wiped under the carpet. There was almost nothing really that you could find if you were to go back, say, 60 or 70 years. Very, very little education, very little keeping that art alive except for just family, kind of a folk medicine. So then 60s, it started to kind of get revitalized. And of course, then everybody kind of associates that with the hippies and the tree-loving hippies and all that. And, and hey, I'm a tree-loving, earth-hugging hippie in myself. So just for a note, even though I got a shaved head, I do love the earth. But that kind of became this kind of gave birth to this kind of new agey, and what you termed woo is absolutely correct. I kind of call it the post-new age neo-woo movement that is just this, anything you wanted to believe, it's okay. If you believe that purple crystals can make you better, well, it will. Well, and it will. I mean, there's something to be said for placebo model and placebo effect. The fact that there is a placebo effect is an incredible, concept, right? If you think about it.
It's pretty powerful stuff by itself.
Well, right. And the fact that if I give you a white pill, there's a 28% chance you're going to feel better. And if I give you a blue pill, it goes up to 32%. And if I give you an injection, it goes up to 36%. What do those things tell us? It doesn't mean that the placebo effect is garbage. It means that this is really something we should probably explore is the relationship between our mind and our bodies and healing. And so anyway, but my point is that whole neo-woo kind of thing was just whatever you think, it's all going to be cool, and there's unicorns and rainbows at the end of every medicine and plant medicine. It's just this kind of white, I say white, but not color of the skin, but just this kind of superimposed white, post-Columbian idea of what maybe the spiritual world of plants really is to the indigenous people and was. And I can say that with a little bit. I mean, I've definitely worked with some different indigenous people, not only here, but in other countries. And I can tell you that we have this kind of weird fake model that is this politically correct ideal that doesn't have anything to do with, hey man, I'm sick, I need to get better. This really practical aspect. So that's a long-winded way, a very long-winded way of saying that, my niche in this is to be able to say, hey man, I'm sick, I need to get better. That's what I'm dealing with. So acute medicine or herbs for acute illness, herbs for acute injury, inflammation and infection management, and of course chronic issues as well. But what really works, and we don't have to get totally wrapped up in the science of it. We don't have to necessarily become reductionist and can say, oh, the only reason this herb works is because of this particular constituent. Every plant has thousands of constituents in them. We have no idea how all that works together. So the first step is saying, I don't really know. And neither does any scientist in this room really know what is going on here. But we do know, we can say with some sort of empiricism, with some sort of empirical knowledge, that if we have 100 people in the room and we give them this particular formula with these herbs in it, 90 of them every time start to get better, within 24 hours. We have some good empirical data there. That's no longer just anecdotal BS. That's really something to think about. So this whole in vivo versus, in other words, in the body versus in vitro type of testing and understanding all of these different models of how our bodies work and how biofilm bacterial, biofilms work that are everywhere in our body, and how infections work and how inflammation really works and what it is very valid to have some reductionistic and kind of biochemical approach to, but it's also very valid to keep open that kind of Gestalt Eastern, sort of philosophy of saying, well, we don't really know how it works, but we know there's a process that does work. So we trust the process, and we trust that plants are a living bio entity. They're not just chemicals any more than we are. There's some sort of an actual, and there is a spirituality to that, whether you look at it as religion or not. There's spirituality to life because there's something there. And I'm not religious myself, but I'm very much a spiritual person. But there's something there that we cannot define. And it's fine to say, we don't know what it is. We don't have to know what it is, but it works. And so that's kind of where I think that Western model meets the Eastern model meets reality to me.
Okay. It's that time for a quick break. Listeners, I have a special announcement. You're going to start getting 2 episodes a week starting April 27th. As previously promised, I am very proud and super excited to share with y'all the new ITRH book club. These new weekly Wednesday episodes will feature an author and one of their books. We'll sit down and discuss who they are, what their book is about, and why you should consider reading or listening to it. Some will be straight how-to survival books, but most will be dystopian and apocalyptic fiction, which I know most of you are huge fans of. And first up, we have a special guest, Chris Weatherman, a.k.a. Angry American, author of the Surviving Home series of books, very popular. There will also be a special offer to get a free audiobook. Now, we're also about to go on summer break. I'm going to start making this announcement every episode like we always do. Since the ITRH summer shorts were so well received last summer, we're going to do those again, and, well, you can expect those every year from here on out. So you won't be left without any ITRH episodes during the summer. They'll just be the short 7 to 15 minute long episodes, probably on the order of every 3 weeks. Now, the last episode of this full season will be May 25th. So we're going to do the 2 episodes a week, every week, starting April 27th, going up until we go on summer break, May 25th. Kind of a nice send-off into the summer there. For those that are new here and don't know what summer shorts are all about, I'll explain quickly. Here goes. ITRH goes on break for a few months every summer, but the show doesn't go totally off the air. You'll get short episodes on a less frequent basis every 3 weeks. Then we'll be back August 1st for the next season. Next up, hey, do you get value out of these episodes? You should see what we do for members. Check it out today for yourself by visiting itrh.net and become part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. That's how we pay the bills, keep the lights on, and keep the microphones hot, doing what we're doing for you around here. What do members get? That is a great question. Members get access to episodes a day early, an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat with myself and other listeners all day long. encrypted forums to chat securely with like-minded people about preparedness, a free copy of the book, Owning Your Survival, 9 Steps for Surviving, Survival, and Preparedness, access to our famous Bob and Emergency Kits video class with special checklist downloads, my insane ammo inventory spreadsheet. You'll finally have instant access to knowing exactly what you have at your fingertips. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH, including one from a famous knife maker that was never aired. That's over 160 hours of survival conversations to help you get better prepared. And I'm adding new stuff almost every other month at this point, which includes the recent 10-part Getting Prepped video series I just loaded up for the members. Visit itrh.net today to learn more and become part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. You'll be helping to keep the show safe and sound that helps keep you safe and sound. Now, let's get back to Sam. Brought up a good point about if you got hit by a bus, you want a good ortho fix and you're not some leaves. What? Actually, I don't think you said it exactly that way, but kind of close. So where does one make sense in the other as far as traditional medicine, not traditional medicine, but conventional medicine versus herbal medicine? Where do those two things meet and where do those two things diverge? Yeah.
That's a great question. And that's really what I co-founded a nonprofit that's a big part of what we're trying to do is where do they merge? And we find more and more that they merge in a lot of places we never would have expected. So for instance, all of the ways that herbal medicine can work with, first of all, just applying the paradigm shift that herbal medicine doesn't cure anything. Herbal medicine fixes the terrain most often, the terrain being the human body, somewhere in the body, so that the human body can heal itself. That's really the key. Okay. And looking at medicine that way is a total, it's like going through the looking glass and looking at it from the other side. So if you can go there, then you start to see, wow, so herbal medicine, first of all, it's not just herbs. We talk about nutrition, we talk about lifestyle, we have to have all these things in place too. So if you've been smoking for 40 years and you have shortness of breath and you're 200 pounds overweight and you want an herb to fix your shortness of breath, you're out of luck. There's no herb to fix that, and there shouldn't be. And there should be no pharmaceutical. There probably is, but there shouldn't be any pharmaceutical for it either. So first of all, it just kind of resets us back and resets us back to where the real zero needs to be, where the real health point needs to be, and that counts for both orthodox and herbal medicine, of course, both. So right there's an integration. And secondly, many chronic illnesses, and I'm talking things that are treated as severe chronic illnesses in especially in our first world environment, in any environment, but you find it here in America, is very much you can help them and even get through them completely with herbal medicine. I've seen it time and time again. An example would be GERD, like a gastroesophageal reflux disease, or what we consider IBS, which is just kind of a catch-all phrase for I don't really know what you have, but it's in the gut. And there's many reasons that those things can go wrong, or that those things can happen. And there's a lot of different approaches to that herbally that I've seen time and time again get people off of pharmaceutical medicine and getting them to actually feel better and getting over it, not being dependent on herbal medicine either. I have to be careful with what I say there because I'm interfering with profit margins there when I say things like that. And that's the only reason I have to be careful. It's not because it's not true. I guarantee you there are doctors I could name scores of doctors that would agree with me on this that I have talked to and that I've worked with. So there's an integration there too. But most importantly for me, and this is maybe for your audience more, is there is definitely an integration with herbal medicine and emergency medicine. Okay. This is especially in a remote or wilderness area. So I always say this because I teach the wilderness first responder. We do wilderness first aid, all of those types of classes. And most of those are done with the context of, how do you package somebody up and get them basically just, get them in a position where they're at least, where you can monitor them and you can package them.
Get them stable,
and they're stable and you can transport them to higher definitive care. So that's always that's kind of the model. But we really at our school try to always go with the model. Okay, we teach you that and we got that now. Now let's pretend there's no higher definitive care for weeks or months or ever. Now what? And where do we go for there? And so from there, we always turn to herbal medicine. And so that really begs the question, what works, what doesn't. And so this is part of what the nonprofit does as well, is we go into places like remote, I mean, like fourth world Nicaragua, where they're still hunting with bows and arrows and spears, and work with things like leishmaniasis, or work with cellulitis and infections like that. Does it work with herbal medicine? Yes, it does. It works very well. So these are things we can definitely do. It's not as simple as just popping a pill. There's no question about it. It's a little more complex, a little more complicated, and you have to have really a better understanding of wound healing and tissue, infection management, and those kinds of things, whether internal, external, the mucosa, the physiology of disease in the body, and you really have to have a better understanding of that, I think. But it can be done.
Okay. So, and that brings us to, I guess, in simple terms, how effective. So we get that there's, especially with the wilderness emergency medicine, there's an effectiveness there, but a lot of it, especially like with first aid, it's just intended to stabilize so that you can get someone to a higher level of care. What can people, like, if they actually got into it, how much could they depend on, say, wilderness and herbal medicine in, say, full-on grid down zombie apocalypse situation versus conventional medicine? Like, where does those two, like, yeah, no, sorry, you're dead, sorry, versus, yeah, right, actually you could treat this. So, like, where do those lines lie?
That's a really good question. And there's, you could come up with a list of things that are definitely absolutely treatable by herbal medicine. You could come up with a list of a lot of gray area stuff, and it just depends on a lot of things: how bad the injury is, what the health of the person is, their age, and the condition of their body to begin with, and then things that are just like, I don't know of any way we're going to possibly deal with this with herbal medicine. The surprising thing is that those things in that latter category, they tend to be also things that, in orthodox medicine, a lot of times people are saying, I don't know for sure if this is going to work. For instance, septicemia. You can be in intensive care in a hospital and get septicemia, and in 20 minutes you can be dead. So there are a lot of things that we can't just say, well, it's because it's herbal medicine, it's not effective. However, that said, somebody gets a through and through gunshot wound to the chest, and they have a sucking chest, they say a tension pneumothorax. Short of a chest tube and sterile conditions to be able to do that, and then lots of antibiotics, it's, that's a really tough one. Could you do something with herbs? Sure. Would it work? Not nearly as high percentage, for sure. No doubt about that. But giardiasis, from drinking bad water, or name a waterborne disease, basically bacteria, protozoan, or helminth, and I can probably match you with just about as much effectiveness. In some cases, more. Certainly, when we get to viral, not necessarily. I'm not talking hepatitis necessarily, but other viral infections, especially flu type stuff, and even Zika and chickpea and all of these dengue. I know I can give you a more effective antiviral herbal treatment for those than you're going to get from pharmaceuticals, because there really isn't a pharmaceutical answer usually. It's just stabilize and keep them fluids in them, and nutrition and rest and good nursing, basically.
Yeah, because you're not really, with virus, you're not actually killing the virus. You're trying to just stabilize the body enough that it can do its job and kill off the virus. As far as I have no medical experience, and I don't play one on the internet, play a doctor on the internet, but that's as far as I understand it, that it's actually, even the antivirals, the pharmaceutical antivirals, they're not killing the virus. They're just kind of managing the symptoms.
Generally, they are. That's correct. So, and in terms of herbs, of course, different viruses have different ways of reproducing and shedding, et cetera. And so, but there are absolutely herbs that work well in blocking some of these things. And then we get into, like any of the herpes family viruses, we have an herb called chaparral, or Celluria species. It's also called creosote bush. It is amazing, in my opinion, better than any acyclovir or anything else that actually is slowing down something like an HSV1 or an HSV2 process of a virus, but any herpes family. This includes lots of people that I've worked with shingles, for instance, and the pain of shingles. So we find there are definitely herbs that work, I think, even better than pharmaceuticals in that area. Not necessarily because we couldn't make pharmaceuticals, but just because there's not enough money in it to do it. Same with antibiotics. There's no money in that, and so we find that's a big part of why we're running out of antibiotics. And this, as well as the fact that over 60% of the antibiotics we make, we use in our food. Feed our chickens and our cows and pigs. So by doing that, we're entering this huge bacterial resistance situation in our entire environment. But that said, there are definitely there's no money in that, so we find that the research slows down, and probably the same thing is true of antivirals because it's like, well, at best, what do you got? You got a customer for 2 weeks,
Mm.
versus a lifetime customer with heart disease or something like that, where the real money is.
As a total aside, my mom was telling me she and my dad had come back from the cardiologist, and the cardiologist is like, "Oh, he's in great health," and I'm like, "The hell he is! He's on $20,000 a year worth of heart medication. It's the man doesn't exercise, he eats like crap, but how can you say he's in good shape? He's just taking a shitload of pills. What the hell is that?"
Yeah.
So, I guess to kind of come back to it, there's another part of this because it's just like preparedness and bushcraft. There's all these little niches inside niches. And with medicine, we'll hear ditch medicine, wilderness emergency medicine, herbal medicine. How do we, and I think they end up often being grouped together as kind of grid down medicine, or maybe that's just me doing it. How do we unpack those and kind of differentiate what's what there and what means what and where does this go and how do we know? And I guess where I'm trying to go is if somebody wanted to start getting into this stuff, like how would they break that out so that they would know what they needed to go to when or how or what the terminology is? I'm making no sense, but I think you might.
No, you're making great sense, and I'm with you on that. And some of these terms have changed over the years. For instance, ditch medicine used to be how Green Beret, medicine was described. It was the epitome of ditch medicine, and that school is the epitome of a ditch medicine training school. But that said, these terms have kind of changed over time too, and of course they mean what people want them to mean. So
yeah.
I think there's an easy differentiation here that may not help with the actual terms themselves, but will certainly help with people figuring out, hey, what do I want to learn? First of all, the question is, how long are you without what we would consider higher definitive care? That meaning, to me, a level 1 trauma center and all the stuff that as gatekeepers that takes you to, which is all of the best, care that we can think of in America, our medical care. And we do have incredibly good doctors, and we have wonderful doctors in this country. The system itself is broken as hell, but the doctors are great.
Mm.
So that would be the higher definitive. When I say higher definitive care, that's what I'm talking about. So we've got the question of time. So how much time do we have between where we are now and that system of higher definitive care? And so that right there is a determination. Secondly, what do you have to work with? In other words, what drugs, medical supplies, resources, everything from tape to antibiotics, whatever, do you have to work with? And that would define, kind of the niche or the genre that we're going to be in. Is it plant medicine? Is it half and half? Is it whatever? And then thirdly, what is your training? What are your skills? Because even if you have all of the coolest antibiotics in the world and you're the most prepped prepper on your block and you're so cool and you got you got a storeroom full of antibiotics, but you have no medical training whatsoever, those antibiotics are really near worthless in my opinion, because you don't have it. If you can't recognize, if you don't even know how to ask somebody if they have an allergy before they're using it, or you don't know how to recognize an allergic reaction, or you don't know what the actual protocol should be, and you create a super infection because you have no idea what you're doing, or you can't even recognize an infection in the first place, So the training should be directly correlated to whatever it is you have in your house or in your first aid bag or whatever. So if you have no idea how to use a stethoscope, then why have a stethoscope that you're carrying around in your bug out bag? Well, maybe if you're doing it because you're on a group of people and you got a doctor there and their pack's loaded, and they need somebody to carry a stethoscope, I understand that. But otherwise, it's just wasted weight.
Mm-hmm.
And so the same applies to whether it's your house or your car or whatever from the prepper standpoint. So those three things, those criteria, then what is, where is, and how far is definitive care, both in terms of distance and availability and time. 2, what do you have to work with in the first place, and 3, what is your training with what you have to work with. So with that, you can then kind of say, okay, herbalism is my thing, and that's what I like to do. But you know what? I really, I also know how to. I know how to wrap an ankle. I know a good sports wrap for an ankle or a knee, or I know how to put, sticks and rag, bandage and splinting type stuff. Well, then that, you're kind of moving into the wilderness first aid side of things. And that's really more of a ditch medicine thing. So even in wilderness first aid and wilderness first responder, you'll have different schools of thought. You'll have some schools out there, and this isn't us, at all, that will be like, well, you can do a traction splint, but you're going to have to carry this traction splint around in your backpack. So you go there and you learn how to use, the latest and greatest titanium traction splint that you could, if you were on an expedition, say to Everest, your Sherpas would carry for you. And that's all cool. But do you know how to do it with a little bit of 550 cord in the stick? Because that's what we teach, and that's what I consider ditch medicine, is working with whatever you happen to have available. And the best of that, usually best case of that, might be something no more than just a triangular bandage and a couple of maybe sterile dressings. And to me, then I add herbs into that. So there's a whole new category there that's kind of this ditch medicine that includes plant medicine, and I don't know what to call that because nobody else is doing it outside of me that I know of anywhere in the world. So. Herbalism, I call it the herbal medic. That's my term for it.
Yeah. That sounds like a good term. And so I guess, so medical skills in general become complicated for people as long as we're on this path. It's like they get it, like, okay, you go to the Red Cross or the American Heart Association, maybe you take an afternoon or a day of CPR and first aid. And that tends to be, I think after that, people get confused as to what to do next. If, especially, we're not even talking about the lay person, just your average run-of-the-mill prepper who's concerned about things breaking down from anywhere from 72 hours to, whatever. If somebody at a cocktail party will say, came up to you and said, I'm a prepper, where do I start? What would you tell them?
I would say start with your gear that you're comfortable with, really, because that's what you're going to be using. So I'd say, okay, let me see your first aid kit. And so they'd open up their first aid kit, and let's say they had some steri strips and some Band-Aids and some athletic tape and some cravats and an EpiPen and a few other things. I'd say, okay, let's lay all of this out. Which ones of these do you not know how to use? Have you ever used an EpiPen? Well, no. Well, okay. Then you either need to learn how to use that EpiPen or get it out of your pack,
Yeah.
And then, so I'd go through that way. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I always tell people, take that stuff, put it back in your pack, make sure you know where it's at. This is a little off the side here, but put it in your pack, shake it up a little bit, and then throw it into a dark room and have your kid stand there with a timer and say, okay, broken right forearm. Go, and you have to run in there and find the stuff you'd work with in complete darkness. So you have to know where your headlamp is first and all that kind of stuff. And if you can't do that, then you really don't know how to use your gear, because that's not even close to what the real world is when you've got an artery spurting, and God forbid it's your own kid or somebody you love, and you've got to deal with all that stress, and then you're trying to remember where you put something and everything, and your hands slipping all over the place. Those are the kinds of things that people don't really think about when they start thinking about quote unquote first aid, which really is not allowed. First aid is not just first aid; it's also last aid if nothing happens. It's your last chance at life sometimes. So it's really, it's a very, very serious. I say serious, but a very serious practice. It's something that I think people should take a lot of pride in, and not just be like, oh yeah, just go. We're a first aid class, and first there's two things there. One is everybody's like, oh yeah, first aid. Well, anybody can take an 8-hour first aid class, and it's true. But secondly, how do you take that and actually work with it? So you took it last year, let's say 6 months ago. Do you remember everything? Do you have the book? Could you tell me, what you test? How do you test somebody for a stroke? That's a pretty real world thing. Or somebody's choking. Can you show me how to do a Heimlich maneuver? Are these are things that if you don't know them, you have to deal with the uncomfortability of not knowing them and admitting it to yourself so that you train them. And so between the training and then your first aid kit, that's how you kind of start to build these little pieces of knowledge. And don't fret the fact that you can't do open heart surgery, in the field because you don't have the kit for it and you haven't taken that class. Just work one little thing at a time. Learn to do a splint. Learn to use a SAM splint for a C-collar. Learn, of course, from head to toe, treat as you go, the primary assessment. What is that? Do I know how to put on a tourniquet? Do I know how to put on a pressure dressing? Do I know what C-spine kind of immobilization, what that concept's about? Taking care of the spine. Do I know how to watch for any kind of breathing problems and how to open an airway? No adjuncts, just by hand. Head tilt, chin lift, and jaw thrust methods. Do I know how to open an airway or turn them to the side? Do I know what a recovery position is? Lateral recumbent position. Those things right there. Those are huge first aid skills to not necessarily in the sense of the big picture that, oh my God, I have all these first aid skills. But if you know them and you're really comfortable with them, you're going to go a heck of a lot more with them than somebody who has studied first aid for, whatever. They majored in college. You can't do that. But let's say you could, and that's all they do. But they've never gotten their head out of the book, and they couldn't think on the ground under stress and do that. That's really, in my opinion, putting that together. I have this little saying. I say it's kind of my own term that or phrase that I've coined. It's the 4 A's of survival. It's attitude, awareness, adaptability, and accountability. So this adaptability is one of those A's that's like a real, that's medicine, man. It's like you don't know what you have to work with. You don't know what's going to be. It's like a fight, you don't know. That's why I think medicine is fighting is so similar. It's the same adrenaline with trauma. You have no idea what's going to happen in a fight, you can't train for everything. You can try, but you have no idea. So you just train for situations and you try to teach your body to do certain things under stress, and then boom, there it is, and you just have to deal with it. And it's the same with medicine. It's at least with trauma. I have no idea, and boom, there it is. And herbal medicine is very much like that. And even in the case of chronic disease, because everybody is different, and you start to realize that no two people respond exactly the same to any two herbs ever. There's definitely some general rules that follow across everybody, but especially when it comes to things like for stress and anxiety and PTSD and those kinds of things, an herb I give to you might have an entirely different effect, really, in the end, or no effect compared to somebody else. And that might sound contradictory, like, well, why even use them? And the reason is because I can have a sort of a materia medica or a repertoire of maybe 20 of those, and out of those 20. For anxiety or say for PTSD, I know that 5 or 6 of them are always going to work in one way or another. And so, I have a pretty good idea based on your history and the things we've talked about what it's going to be, but I'm not quite sure. So we'll try this out. Did it work? Nah, kind of. All right, try this one. Oh, that works amazing. So that's kind of, so you can narrow things down.
Well, I think conventional pharmacology in a lot of ways is you've got like 20 different pills out there and it's like, pick which one works. And usually there's one that works most of the time, but it ends up sometimes there's people that are in some way resistant to things, whether it's psychological or physiological, whether it's brain chemistry or the rest of the body chemistry. I've seen a lot of times where they end up having to run through a bunch of different pharmaceuticals to try to figure out, even though they're supposed to all do the same thing, trying to find the one that's actually going to work with that person.
Good point. Exactly. Yep.
So that's really interesting. And I think there's so much passion in listening to you talk about this and everything that you've done. So there had to have been a goal and kind of a core concept with the human path. What are you trying to do over there?
So here I've kind of borrowed a little bit from a special forces model in my special forces days, in the sense that I set up different paths. There was so much information. I was into survival. I did all kinds of survival. I was teaching survival 25 years ago in the Army as well, as to civilians. I started my own survival school a couple different times, and neither of them really went anywhere. But the time wasn't ripe yet for it, and I didn't have the experience or the resources. So I've been into that for a long time. I grew up, as I said, doing a lot of survival type stuff. Been into the martial arts for since I was 13. I've been into the whole concept of basically what I decided was, okay, look, all of these skills really, it's just a big pile here. We need to organize this. And the way we can do this best is by creating a team concept, because all survival really is all about team and community. There's no such thing as individual survival, in my opinion. It's very difficult anyway, at least, especially if we're going at it from like grid down situation. If you are, that lone survivor mentality, it's like, well, what you are is you're a donor for other people who get it and are working in groups. It's really what you are. Unless you can stay awake 24 hours a day and never need food, and so unless you're Superman, that ain't going to happen. So how does that work then? So I created these 4 paths, and the paths were, well, it's 5 actually, but the 5th is kind of, it's intertwined. It's not really a specific path. The 4 paths are the path of the hunter-gatherer, the path of the primitive engineer. So they basically relate to how we relate to the world. So I had the path of what I called the intellect, our ability to problem solve, was the primitive engineer, the engineering concepts, off-grid engineering type stuff. Then I had the medic, which was a relationship between ourselves and our body. How does our body work? How do we help and how do we hurt the body? So it's both self-defense and, of course, it's lots of medicine.
See, that's one of the most interesting things I've seen, I think, in a lot of courses, really, is that you married martial arts and medicine together. And not that I think anybody who's spent some time in it does understand the correlation between the two. And I hate to interrupt you, but I do want to understand like your correlation there. Like, why is it important? If you're going to study martial arts, and why should you know both how to hurt the body and how to heal the body?
Yeah, and that's a great question, though, and a lot of people don't understand that. And so I liken it back, of course, to my own martial arts background and what I mentioned, what got me into medicine, but also just understanding how the body works, the anatomy and the physiology of the body. You can't help study, if you study anatomy of the body, and a lot of martial arts is really about the best geometry of anatomy wins, whether it's on the ground. I mean, it's really a question of range more than anything, whether it's, sticks and swords and spears, or whether it's kicking and punching, or whether it's the clinch, or whether it's on the ground. There's a geometry that's related to the anatomy of the human body that is part of the intricacy, or rather the part of the infrastructure, really, of what a martial art is. And you can't study the anatomy without studying the physiology behind it too. And so by doing this, you get into the body and how the body works. And so then you start to get into how the body doesn't work. And the relationship becomes very apparent once you start to do that. The other thing I'll say is that of all of my time in Special Forces, the only people who were that I ever knew who were just absolute avid martial arts freaks were always the medics. And in my own background with, working with Chinese, martial arts, where I started, and then I kind of woke up to the whole idea of mixed martial arts and grappling later. But the whole idea of Chinese martial arts was I was really into studying as a kid. I was kind of fascinated by the idea of the Taoist monks and Shaolin monks, and how they studied all of this martial arts, but yet they really, the study of healing was absolutely intricate or integral to their training as well. You had to do it, right? So that's kind of the relationship and how it came about to me. And to me, it's really the most normal thing in the world. But a lot of people are like, well, wait a minute, why would you learn how to hurt the body if you're learning how to heal it too? Well, and the final thing is, especially in a grid down situation, but in remote environments we've been in Nicaragua and other places, you don't know what's going to happen. So you need to understand security. And really, as a caregiver, as any kind of health caregiver, whether I'm a doctor, a nurse, an herbalist, whatever, I am in charge of that patients or that clients or whatever with their health and welfare while they're under my care. I have to be. So if that person can't do them for themselves, if they're in a coma or they're really badly injured, I have to take care of them too. So I have to know how to deal with it. And there's nothing I hate worse than the classic kind of Western model of the doctor working in a clinic and people come in with firearms, and it's like, oh, I'm a doctor, so now it's time to give up and be the peaceful doctor because I never hurt. It's like bullshit, man. I'm gonna, I'll shoot you in the face and then I'll take care of you afterwards if I have to. But you're threatening my patient, you're threatening my life, you're threatening my clinic, and that's a no-go. So there's that aspect, just this pure old, kind of military security, special forces background there too.
Mm-hmm. So now I got you totally off track because I was fascinated with the
That's okay. That was just the second path, right? And the third path is the relationship between ourselves and our environment. I'm really good at getting off track and coming back on.
Awesome.
That's what I do. So back and back on. So then this is the environment, and our relationship with the environment. I used to call that the hunter-gatherer, and we had an urban and a primitive version of that. Now we just call it the provider. What that means is, how do you hunt? How do you take care of work with harvesting animals? How do you grow them? Permaculture, and how do you, or just your regenerative agriculture? How do you actually grow food in either an urban or a social or community setting? So all of these things go into basically understanding our environment, and there, so that's vast. Obviously, that's huge. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth is what I say is a relationship between ourselves and our mind, and that relates to also how we relate in social situations, in communities, and then how we basically learn about our awareness of that, what's about around us. And so that we call the scout. So all of these things, I kind of gave you the more esoteric, or ethereal version there, but the reality of it is, in a team, you have a scout that is your advance party. We have to have those if we're going to go somewhere, like we're going to, in different places in the U.S. or in Nicaragua or wherever. We have to have people down there, or at least a person. And it's usually me right now, but this is an actual, concept of training for people to be able to go understand ingress and egress routes, know land navigation, know E&E plans. If you're in an environment, you have no idea what might happen. You need to have an E&E plan for the team. You need to understand rally points. You need to understand commo. You need to understand how to, what the language is, what the currency is, what the customs of a people are. And then most importantly, you need to understand what is it they need that we're sending a team down for. Not what do we think they need, but what do they really need? And so this is, so there's a lot that goes into Scout. And then as we go down as a team, we still need Scout, and Scout is kind of the strategic security as well. But then we have, we need primitive engineers for our water purification projects. So we do slow sand filtration and things like that for off-grid power. And then we need our providers for things like growing, regenerative agriculture and teaching people how to grow their own medicine. And then we need the medics, obviously, for the piece that is all about the herbal clinics. So the whole thing kind of comes together in this team, very similar to how, it was when I was in SF. We had, the teams, and everybody knows, or probably does if you're, if you're listeners, the engineer and the commo and the medic and the weapons guy that made up a special forces team, and then of course you had the leaders,
Mm-hmm.
the team sergeant, team leader. So that's and leadership and teamwork is just is actually the fifth path, but it's really integrated into everything we do through scenario and hands-on and through the real world missions we run.
Hmm.
I don't say missions as in military, but just the projects we do is probably a better way to put it. So this is how it all comes together.
Are they like aid missions y'all do?
Yes. So for instance, the last one we did in Nicaragua was with the Rama Indians, and it was creating water filtration for them because a lot of their diseases are water-based. So it's there again, part of the scouting is what's the epidemiology of their disease? Where is it coming from? They have lots of different issues that are related to parasites, both protozoan and helminthic parasites. So water quality is a big problem. So how do we make water for them, and how do we teach them to filter their own water so it's not just going down there and unpacking a bunch of brand new water filters out of a box? So we're making slow sand filtration using the sand off the beach, using the gravel that we collect off the beach basically too, cleaning it down there, and then making our own charcoal. And the only thing we're buying is PVC and food grade barrels and stuff, which you can get in pretty much any third world country. You can still get those things. Mm-hmm. So that's how we would do that. And then they actually wanted to learn blacksmithing. And so we taught them, we have a whole blacksmithing program, and we had teaching them kind of contingency blacksmithing. Really, we bought like one sledgehammer, and I think we got that in Costa Rica on the way down. We could have picked it up in Nicaragua too, but we got that in Costa Rica, and then had a smith hammer. And so we didn't get to the point of making those, but everything else was done with nothing, with just metal found lying around as trash, all the steel that's around there. And they have some actually really good old steel down there. And then they were making, it looked, within like 5 hours, we had just hordes of little, Rama Indian Nicaraguan kids laughing and with piles of fish spear, tips and arrowhead tips. It looked like a sweatshop, it's just hilarious. They were just having the best time. So we're doing that kind of on the off-grid side too, because that's what they really wanted. They wanted that. And then we've got the herbal clinics going on, of course, to help with the health problems. And that relates all the way up to, some of their biggest problems, such as birthing. So, one of the things, if we can get the money together for it, would be to actually create a midwifery program for them down there.
Oh, neat.
They're like a day or more canoe paddle away from the clinic, and the clinic is, not much to speak of. And so they lose about one woman a year in childbirth. That's a lot for their population size. Mm-hmm. So these are other things we pick up then as part of scouting, goes back to epidemiology, what's going on with them. So these are, I guess you could say, aid missions, but really from the ground up rather than just being, a bunch of first world. I've been in those too many times where you're just out there handing out pharmaceuticals like they're candy.
Doctors Without Borders kind of.
Yeah, although I don't want to say, Doctors Without Borders does really good things too, and of course they're handling trauma and a lot of stuff along, in really bad situations where the only thing they can do is hand out, pharmaceuticals too sometimes, but more like you get a lot of like medical schools and stuff that will put that will send down third and fourth year students along with their farm students and a couple of doctors, and they'll set up these clinics, and they'll just it's just all antibiotics and steroids and vitamins. It's like everybody gets a prize. Everybody walks away with something.
Antibiotics for you. Antibiotics
3 weeks later, it's like they're back to exactly where they started. Even worse, because now instead of working with the problem and understanding, there might be plant medicine to help them with it, or something that they can do on their own. They're dependent, on the system that's broken in the first place.
Wow. So how do people connect with you? Because you've gone and essentially built Zombie Apocalypse School in a box. Mm-hmm. How do people connect with you, find out about your courses, and come partake of your knowledge and start on that path?
Sure. Through our website. I would mention too, just because you said Zombie Apocalypse, we used to actually run a Zombie Apocalypse here, and it was something else. It was like a 3-day experience. We would have over 50 volunteers as zombies. We would have role players that were bad guys, role players that were good. It was like The Walking Dead with bandits. And
oh, holy crap.
We had a whole, like a news. I even had some friends who have a green screen that would do like a newscast. And so all the participants in this, the only place they get their information is through a private YouTube channel that was like a newscast that they'd watch every other night for about 2 weeks prior to it. It would start out with like, this virus and blah, blah, blah. And then it'd get worse and worse. And by the end, the reporters, like there's gunshots in the background, the reporters running and screaming. So people are freaked out before they even walk in the door or on the campus,
Yeah.
And we had the second year, we had a thing where we actually had a place all south of San Antonio, and our school's north of San Antonio. And we had, it was like the city was on lockdown. It was just the same story had just been continued a full year. The plot, it was like a story that the plot had continued. And so we had you had to get out of town. You needed kind of coyotes to come and pick you up. And so we had these guys pick them up in this old abandoned building that was like 3 a.m. They'd been there since 10 p.m, having to set up security and then we get these. I had these big biker looking dudes who were basically actors for us. And we had student plants in this team itself that were plants to be able to say something bad so we could take them behind a building and beat them to death. It'd sound like. And so I mean really we played it pretty hardcore, and so nobody's getting any sleep. They're tired, they're cold, they're hungry, and we managed to steal their gear each time. And there's anyway, my point is the zombie apocalypse was a wonderful idea, but it took so much work. We stopped doing it because it was just like we were zombies for like 3 months afterwards.
I would imagine that's like the not Ranger School, but the just about, I can't think of the name of it now, basically where they have to go through that simulation themselves, or a similar simulation. Wow, that's, man.
So SEER School, maybe you're thinking.
No, maybe it was. No, there was another one that Rangers go through. I don't know. I can't remember. But but basically a giant simulation like that. That's amazing. So y'all stopped doing that though?
Yeah, we stopped it about 4 years ago. It was just too much work for us. Maybe one day if we have the personnel to do it. But for me and my wife, we're kind of the mom and dad of the school, and it's just like we can't take that on our plates anymore. We're so busy with other stuff. Mm-hmm. Just running this. We got so much. The school has grown so much. So the Human Path is the name of the school, and the humanpath.org or the humanpath.com will both get you to the website. The Human Path, not so the word "the" in front. thehumanpath.com. But then also the nonprofit is called herbalmedics.org. So Herbal Medics. And if you go to theherbalmedic.com, then you can see my book there, because I'm not selling it through Amazon anymore. So that's the only place to get my book right now. I'm writing a volume 2. And once I get that out, I'll probably go back to Amazon. But right now, if you're looking for my book, it's called The Herbal Medic. And you can get to it at theherbalmedic.com.
Okay. And how do your classes typically run? Are they on like a semester system, or how do you schedule those?
It depends. So we have a huge herbalism program, really. I mean, literally, if you put it all together, several years of herbalism classes, and most of that's online. A good part of that's online, but we have mandatory on-site. So what'll happen is, like, say you're taking the clinical herbalism course, you have to have a certain number of clinical hours in running in our clinic. So you have to come down to our clinical weeks. Like we have one coming up, in fact, in a couple of weeks, where you get 5 days of clinical practice, by being there for 5 days. Some of our courses are 3 day long, some are 2 day long. A lot of the ones that are here in town are anywhere from 2 hours to 1 day to 2 day to even 3 day. And then we have a few that are back to back. Like we have a wilderness first responder that's 10 days, and we back to back that with like our kind of our entry level program for all of our stuff. If you want to actually get into really being a part of what our school does, then you got to come to the core basic, and that's a 5 day program. It's sort of, I call it a survival course, but it covers all those 4 areas I was talking about.
Oh, wow.
Each day we kind of spend on a different spot, and it's pretty, we could do some cool stuff, a lot of cool scenarios and an adrenaline drill. And, we try to really make things as real as we can. So that's a 5 day course. And so sometimes people will back to back that, or the scout program. We have an advanced scout program, and they'll be down there for like a month. So we do that in the spring and the fall. And then in the summer, I pretty much travel because it's just too hot to get people out. It's hard to get people down here and out here in Texas in the heat. Yeah. So, and we have such a huge online program anyway. So the entry level class to the online stuff is a 12-week program. And then we run that 3 times a year. So I have another one starting up in June. And it's basically, it's all the stuff's recorded, and some is live, and it's all webinars. And I have, and it's a start date, it has a finish date, it has, we have lots of downloads, we have quizzes, it's a full program, and that kind of gets you enough information to be able to then take our advanced medicine making course, or our clinical program, or our women and children, kind of what we consider like a family practice, that's taught by our midwife, herbalist, and she's down and has a clinic down in Mexico now, and but she runs her classes from down there. And we have an emergent responder class, a course that's starting up this fall, that's much more towards just the kind of thing that mostly preppers would be into, the CERT program, and of course all the FEMA stuff, and just knowing how the real system, we call the real system works, how that works, and then of course radio and commo and ham and all the stuff that goes into actual emergency response, and then all from the standpoint of herbalism and herbal medicine in that kind of an environment, and wilderness first responder in that kind of an environment.
Wow, you really have built a zombie apocalypse school in a box.
Yeah, it's getting there. And
Yeah.
I didn't even mention the final one we're doing starting this next year. This time next year is called the Steward, and that's going to be all of our cash crop herbal growing. We have a huge greenhouse. We have 50 acres that we're restoring. We've been working on land remediation now for several years. So there's a whole permaculture. I don't want to say, I mean, a lot of people that come in have PDC, but we're not, a permaculture school by any means. We're more into regenerative agriculture and working with, of course, livestock and plants, and then mostly for medicinal, lots of food, of course, too, but medicinal plants, and for people who want to get into that as a living, even be able to grow medicinal plants.
Oh, neat. Okay. So give us your website addresses one more time.
It's thehumanpath.com or thehumanpath.org. Either one will get you there.
Mm-hmm. The aid website
the nonprofit is herbalmedics.org.
Awesome. Dude, Sam, I want to sincerely thank you. This has been truly fascinating. We're going to have you on again because this is such a big topic. We can't cover it in one show.
I'd love to, yeah.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to have been here, and thank you to all your listeners out there who hopefully enjoyed this and got something out of it too.
Here are the announcements again, one more time and super fast. The new Wednesday ITRH Book Club will start April 27th. Doubling your ITRH pleasure, doubling your fun. The ITRH season end is May 25th. The summer shorts will start shortly after that, so you're not left totally hanging during the summer. And the next season will start August 1st, 2016. If you love ITRH and want us to keep doing what we're doing around here for you, visit itrh.net. Today, become part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. You'll be keeping the show safe and sound that helps to keep you safe and sound. And with that, we wrap up episode number 165 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.